I'm honored to be here today to present this masterclass to you. And we'll be talking about how we at Housemarque created Returnal, our most ambitious and biggest title to date. Just like all good stories, it's probably the best place for us to start would be from the beginning, right? When first jumping into Returnal, one of the first things I wanted to do was just define the project goals first, right? I mean, we had a really big budget, we're shooting for the stars. And you know what they say, right? I mean, anyone can handle adversity, but if you want to test a game developer's character, just give them a big budget. And one of the first things that we defined was that we really wanted to bring that established brand of Housemarque explosive action and cool tech to a AAA third-person package. And back then, I remember saying that AAA for us just means awesome arcade action. And second project goal was to bring roguelike elements for replayability and depth. And last but not least, we wanted to weave a mystery-driven narrative that would ultimately haunt the player long after the credits have rolled. So, sounds pretty simple, right? And after this, one of the first things that we did was put together the elevator pitch, as I like to call it. So this was essentially the initial premise for the game, and it went something like this. So you crash land on a hostile alien planet. You don't remember how or why you got there. You quickly succumb to its cosmic horrors, but upon your death, instead of finding peace, you just reawaken just moments before the inevitable crash landing again. So you're trapped in an endless cycle where even death is no escape. Each time you awaken, the planet seems somehow different, like some cosmic forces are toying with your sanity. With each cycle, you slowly learn more about the planet. You see remnants of an alien civilization that met an untimely demise. But most eerie of all, you also see some things that appear deeply personal in nature. So it's almost like this planet knows you better than you know yourself. And your only hope is to keep moving forward and keep looking for answers. Your only hope is to break the cycle before the cycle breaks you. And that was the premise that I had to say this at least 470 times throughout development for onboarding, whether it's new recruits or with co-dev studios or even just internally, just reminding people what the premise, what the concept of the game is. And next up, we can look at how we actually solidified the vision for Returnal. So lots of time spent on Pinterest, lots of raw materials collected on PureRef, mood boards, mind maps, different presentations. And honestly, through this process, I just followed the rule of cool. So it was just, if something spoke to me, if something created a feeling, even if I didn't understand exactly why, I took a note of it. I just added it to the mood board. I'm like, this is cool, And because you're chasing a dream, you're chasing a feeling when you're doing creative work, right? You're chasing the intangible. And many times you're more guided by how will this make players feel. So I really wasn't concerned at all about internal consistency and kind of connecting these things. It's just, this is a series of really cool moments, and it's going to be an amazing experience. During this distillation process, we also defined Celine's character. And one question I often get asked is what came first, the story or the character? And in our case, it was definitely the story. Because much like all of us, I think Celine was also a direct product of her environment, right? So she had a dream of becoming an astronaut and explore the cosmos. And her road to achieving this was really wrought with challenges and some generational trauma. We also knew that our main character would be, old enough to be a parent, to have accumulated some baggage and some regrets in life. So, she couldn't just be like a 22-year-old just running around, right? And we also knew that we wanted her to be really smart and analytical, but also philosophical and carrying, perhaps some guilt. There's that sweet spot between having a hint of vulnerability and humanity in our character as well. But early on, we realized very early that we didn't want our character to be too vulnerable because, well, in a traditional Lovecraftian sense, you would usually have a character just descend into madness and they cower in the corner. They cannot cope. They cannot move on. But gameplay comes first, right? And when you have this kind of explosive, stylized badassery on screen, you can't really have a character that's just crushed by kind of the fear of these forces. So The gameplay dictated in many ways what kind of personality Celine was, just as much as the backstory was. And from the gameplay, we just identified that Celine is actually a character who is determined to a fault. And this is woven back into her personal story, but it's something that you see on display and you feel as a player every time you pick up the controller. And from this process, Celine was born. And we're really happy that we found that right balance of grit, relatability, and also that power fantasy. Next up, we're going to be looking at how we found the fun. We're going to be looking at some old prototypes. And this is where we look at our humble beginnings. It's interesting because this is from the end of 2017, the first year of development. And aside from a couple of rough edges, if you can look very closely, you can already see kind of like the game that we ended up shipping. I mean, we have the minimap, the third-person camera, the compartmentalized rooms that we randomly interconnect, the health pickups. I mean, this was essentially, it was the final game, just a really, really bad version of it, right? But yeah, I'm happy to say that we did actually nail a lot of the fundamentals early on, but there were a lot of challenges that we faced. And arguably the biggest one on a high level was just going from 2D to 3D, because in 2D you have like in the Next Machina that we see on the left, you have this intuitive spatial awareness, right? So you have a 360 view of what's happening. You have all the information needed to make decisions. In a third-person space, you actually have a really narrow field of view, right? You have a view frustum, you can't see what's happening on the sides or behind you. And yeah, things like bullet hell and compartmentalization of spaces is fairly easy in 2D, right? You have, yeah, when you move to 3D, this introduced a new dimension of possibilities for us, but also a dimension of complexity. And it's important to note once again that there was no reference game for us. There was no third-person run and gun and jump shooter with bullet hell elements and this kind of fast-paced combat, so we just had to carve our own path. One of the first things we looked at were, of course, defining the controls. And we wanted to preserve that snappy arcade feel in 3D space, right? And I think I'm happy to say that we actually nailed these early on. So we didn't actually change the controls that much after the first few months of just tinkering. And it helped that we had a really, really simple and clear philosophy for this, that responsiveness and gameplay always comes first. And that helped really keep things simple for us. And next up, okay, so we had our controls, now we needed to give players something to shoot. And we had this chaser guy that ended up being our lab rat for all sorts of unholy experiments. We were trying to find our popcorn enemy, right? So the one enemy that we would just have in large numbers, really small time investment, simple homing behavior, just like Next Machina. Like, of course it's going to work out of the box, right? We're like, okay, yeah, here's our chasers, and you can see there's a lot of backpedaling, there's a lot of just, you know, that really one-dimensional type of gameplay. In Next Machina this worked, but here nothing interesting is happening. And then we also had the navigation to actually consider, and we have this example of shooting fish in a barrel, because you'd have the enemies now that had to climb up, and they used like, you know, really fancy animations to do so. So you could just be sitting on top like a ledge and just picking them out one by one. These were problems that we never had to deal with before as designers, right? And they were just too easy to cheese. And in the end, I think what we ended up doing was just giving them a bigger time investment, so there's not just one bullet. We ended up giving them a spread shot, so they just reinforced the bullet hell. And we realized that for melee attacks, melee works a lot better for larger enemies, where you have the opportunity to build that kind of dance, to tango with them a bit more. Next up, enemy engagement. So similarly, thinking in 2D, thinking like a really simple, we wanted to have a lot of enemies. We thought we'd keep them simple and predictable, and we just create engagement through numbers, right? So again, thinking in 2D, you can see the naivety on display here with all of our prototypes. They're mostly static enemies. They're shooting the player. You can strafe to avoid them, everything. There's no synergy between the enemies. I mean, all of these were designed in isolation with a fairly 2D thinking. And they're just too easy to snipe from a distance, right? So we thought, okay, maybe one thing that can help us solve this was trying medium-range combat. So here the bullets actually don't fly that far. It forces you to get up close to the enemies. This does create some near-field engagement with them, but we still didn't fix the fundamental problem, which was that enemies were just really one-dimensional and weren't doing anything interesting. I mean, this guy here, he's doing this really fancy kind of like, magic gathering attack, but it's just a turret, right? Yeah, it's too easy to divide and conquer the enemies. It was just really static. And long story short, what we ended up settling on was, yes, simple is good, simplistic isn't. So one-note enemies weren't viable. We just added more layered attacks and depth, and more mindful utilization of that vertical space. So this spore wizard, or the mycomorph enemy as we called it, it started as the static turret. Now we added teleportation to it to cover ground, an AoE attack, a slowdown grenade that slows down the player. So this led to bigger, more interesting encounters, while still keeping things really simple and readable. So simple, not simplistic. Next up, the cutting room floor. So believe it or not, we actually considered adding NPCs to Returnal at some point. Yes, this was a really sophisticated prototype, as you can see. Many minutes of love went into this. And there was actually one that we tested fairly late in production as well, as you can see. Like Celine is a bit more recognizable here. It was just like a spore wizard that just, is kind of having a bad day and asks you for some help, and you can bring an item and all that. So we dropped it because we kind of wanted to support the solitary journey of Celine more, and it was just out of scope to do it properly. Another thing that we tried was droids. So inspired by classic shoot-em-ups such as Gradius, where they have these helper-like droids that follow you around. They're also known as options usually in those games. These would follow you around and add, layers of firepower and supporting actions. But as you could probably see, it introduced way too much clutter and noise in the combat, so we axed it pretty quickly, actually. And last but not least, there was this idea of being corrupted by the forces of the alien planet. And we thought, what if Celine could be transformed into a pitiful but dignified creature that's really corrupted by this, hostile planet of Atropos? And this was our lead designer's interpretation of that idea. So, bless his heart. So, there was a really quick test to see, okay, is it viable to just transform into something else? There's about 73 reasons we didn't end up going with this, but you can see one of them. But this is also a testament to the prototyping power of Unreal Engine 4 and what that power can do when placed in the right hands. And just wrapping up now, last couple of slides. So just a few key takeaways. Chasing the dream, right? That was the name of the presentation, and I think that's what we should do, is to chase the dream and champion our vision, right? I think compromising leads to mediocrity, and I think we should all just follow our own rule of cool and not overthink it, and just, do what feels is best. I mean, everything is a product of its time anyway, right? So in 20 years from now, I'm going to look back and say, it kind of made sense to just make a game like that back then, so don't overthink it. And build on your strengths. I think it's important to just remember who you are, just get the fundamentals right, as they will carry the game. And just really focus on what really makes your unique brand of games tick. And this is kind of like a bit of a disappointment in a way, but know that there's no silver bullet. There is no secret sauce. I mean, making games is really, really hard work, and pursuing greatness won't ever come free. And your resolve will be tested, just like ours was. But I think that knowing that it's going to be tough going in, knowing that there's no silver bullet, can make the difference between fight or flight when those instincts kick in, or when the uncertainty kicks in, And speaking of uncertainty, I think it's something that we as creative people just need to learn to embrace. So, creative work is always going to be filled with doubt. So having uncertainty, having that fear is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're doing what you love. And, the perfect plan only exists in hindsight anyway. So, and I think it's also important, when you're chasing your dream, to not become a prisoner of that dream either. So in the end, the game is the boss, and you need to listen to the game, listen to the team, and just take care of the game, keep it in good shape, keep it playable, and just listen to what it's trying to tell you. I think Returnal was It was really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us, and I feel like together we managed to create something that we would be proud of for the rest of our lives. So, thank you.